Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. And thank you so much for being here for the first face-to-face NISEC event that we have had since 2019. It's been a long time coming. It's very good to see so many people here and online, as we are now a hybrid organisation, it would appear. NISEC, as many of you will know, is a UK-based learned society that's committed to serious thinking about career development. We very intentionally draw people together from practice, from research, from policy making and scholarship. And we seek to make sure that we're exploring the spaces between all these things where they intersect. And we also define career development very broadly. So we're as interested in what's happening in schools, whether it's in England with the Gatsby benchmarks or in the devolved nations with all-age approaches, as we are with work done in public employment services, in private practice and by employers of all shapes and sizes. I'm Gill, the chair of NISEC. We have 32 fellows currently, 19 international fellows, some of whom are here with us in the room and online, and nearly 100 members with over 500 people subscribing to our free updates. There's over 70 people here in the room today and tomorrow, and more joining us online. My job here is to introduce the conference, just going to set a few parameters before I introduce our first two speakers and chair this opening session. So we chose this theme, career and sustainability, towards the end of 2022. We wanted a theme that was important to the world, that would provide fertile ground for debate, and would challenge us all to change the way we think and work, so there's a tangible benefit to the time that we spend together here for the conference. So we came up with career and sustainability, but with three dimensions within that, as you can see: skills, well-being, and the environment. And we want to see how those three things work together. Of course, we know that both career and sustainability are in some ways both quite slippery terms. We know that career can be interpreted broadly as a course through life. Most definitions hone in, don't they, on learning, earning and work. But some are much broader than that. I think the broadest I've ever seen is by three NISEC fellows in the introduction to the Oxford Handbook of Career Development, which is, I'll just let you read that. It's a pretty broad definition. It's career is everything, isn't it? But as the opening knot in that first sentence shows, career can also be hamstrung by associations with very narrow definitions of success or assumptions about status and about vertical progression. Similarly, sustainability can be slippy. And in putting the conference together, we've deliberately surfaced that slipperiness and we want to use it creatively. So the dictionary definition of sustainability even links two of the dimensions that we're talking about. We've got sustainability in relation to the overall labour market, the skills needed for economic growth and labour market challenges that we're currently experiencing, particularly, although not limited, of course, to the UK at this politically interesting time. I wonder how many times that interesting term will be used over the next couple of days. We must also think about the sustainability of each person's career over a lifetime, not just in terms of learning and growth, but also well-being and satisfaction. And we've got a panel and a keynote later today from Ants de Vos theorising what a sustainable career could be. And none of us careers alone. We career on this planet and in place. So the global challenges we're facing, and particularly the climate emergency, are of course major concerns for sustainability. We often put the word career alongside development, don't we? And the same goes for the term sustainable. And the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals show exactly how expansive the concept of sustainable development can be. You've probably all seen these. I'll just remind you that the United Nations describe them as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and in the future. An urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing in global partnership, recognising that ending poverty and other deprivations need to go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So that shows that the breadth of approach we're taking is enshrined in the work of multilateral organisations. So my thing that I'd like to ask you to think about as the conference programme unfolds, with plenaries consisting of keynotes and panels and a programme of parallel sessions, is to please consider all three of these terms and these themes and how they connect. Do we lose focus by using the terms too broadly, or is it helpful? Tomorrow after lunch, we have a World Cafe event where we'll discuss the themes and capture our own responses. And we hope that the conference conversations will spill out and involve others through social media, where we invite you to use the hashtag NICEC24 and continue beyond the event, even after our closing keynote from Dr. Candy Ho tomorrow. And after the event, a special issue of the NICEC Journal is going to be published as well. I've got a few housekeeping points about the conference practicalities for everyone's comfort and benefit. So I hope that you've all seen that the Wi-Fi codes are on there's a QR code on the wall and notices in each room. We're not expecting a fire alarm. So if it goes off, it's real. Listen, if it's an intermittent alarm, be alert. If it's continuous, we need to evacuate. Look for the fire marshals in high-vis jackets and do not use the lift. Our meeting point will be outside the Apple store on New Street. Make of that what you will. There are toilets for everybody on each of the floors that we're using. If you want to take photos during the event, please be aware that some people might not want to be in them. Russell, our official NICEC photographer and fellow, is taking photos for us, for NICEC. So if you don't want to be in any photos, please let Russell know and he will avoid you. In terms of lunch and refreshments, all the scheduled breaks are in the atrium, which you've probably already found, just 3 steps down in the service area. And we've got seating around the terrace and beyond. The refreshment area that you might not yet have found on the first floor will be kept stocked for ad hoc refreshments during the day. The standard menu includes vegan and gluten-free, and if you've got other requirements you've let us know about, like halal, gluten or dairy-free, you'll have a separate plate, so please make yourself known to the serving staff. My colleague Michelle has been organising sign-up for the parallel sessions, so please respect those sign-ups and ensure that all of our workshop speakers get an audience. If you're joining us tonight for the drinks reception and meal, enjoy a drink with thanks to the Career Development Institute and take part in a careers-related quiz with prizes, careers-related prizes. Now, I think that's everything. Let's carry on with our opening session. As we said, we want to debate, challenge and generate some tangible outcomes. So to kick us off, let's first of all welcome Professor Chris Warhurst from the Institute for Employment Research at the University of Warwick, who is going to speak to us about workforce sustainability, recent policy concerns and their implications for careers thinking. Thanks, Chris. Chris will speak for about 20 minutes. I'll invite questions for clarification after that, whilst we hand over to Clare, our second speaker. Thanks, Chris.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. What you're about to see is a battle. And it's a battle between my daughter and myself. She's 11 years old. I did some slides at the weekend, 6 slides, 20 minutes. And she said to me, she had a quick look through them, she went, boring. Too much text. You need some fancy pictures. So what you've got is the battle between us. Some pictures from her and some text from me. And this is, as we know, Father's Day just went past, and she sent me this for my Father's Day card. And it says, Happy Father's Day. In exchange for my hellish teenage years ahead, I commit to being your IT support forever. Don't go, oh, that's terrible. The message inside says, Happy Father's Day. I didn't send you an electronic present because I know you wouldn't understand how to open it. So, I want to talk to you about a couple of things, but just as some context. So my institute, the Institute for Employment Research at Warwick University, basically started 40 years ago because there was, here in Birmingham and other places, lots of youth labour unemployment, and nobody knew where the jobs would be in the future. So the government said, the microphone's on. So the government said to us, if we give you some money, can you try and find out where the jobs will be in the future? So we have something called Working Futures, and we've been producing it for the UK government for the last 40 years. Where it goes, nobody knows. I was just saying, I was at Cabinet Office a while back, and they said to me, somebody said, it would be great if we had some data on where jobs would be in the future. I said, we've been doing it for you for the last 40 years. We use that with something called LMI for All, which is a kind of app which says where jobs will be in the future, what types of jobs, whether it's occupations or skills that are needed for them. We've done some work with the MOD on military veterans, trying to transition them into civilian workplaces. And we do a lot, and we develop the good work measures that hopefully will be more prevalent from next week onwards. And we do something called the SOC, the grad SOC, the STEM SOC, and the green SOC. And the SOC is the standard occupational classification, as many of you will know. Every job in the UK has a number and a descriptor. And we were instrumental in developing that in the 70s, and we've spun it off into things like the graduate standard occupational classification, the STEM SOC. It's interesting we talk about STEM occupations, but nobody ever asked, what is a STEM occupation? Until recently. So we were commissioned to try and develop that. And we've done one that I'll talk a little bit about, which is the green SOC. And we're currently working on a couple of things. For the UK government, trying to develop a skills taxonomy. We talk about skills endlessly, but we have a big problem is that nobody knows what a skill is. So for the first time, the UK government has said to us, do you think you can develop a taxonomy of that? And so we're working on that, and hopefully the first iteration of that will come out at the end of this year. And then for the European Commission, Skills for Industry 5.0. For those of you who have not been listening, Industry 4.0 was over before it was introduced. And we're now on 5.0, which is about sustainability, resilience, and human-centered workplaces. And I want to look at 4 things based on some of the research that we've been doing over the years. And by workforce sustainability, I mean keeping people in work. It is interesting. We talk about sustainability, and we usually mean things like supply chains, are they okay, and environmental things. But we actually don't talk about workforce sustainability. I mean, we've got a lot of people who are dropping out of the workforce because they're ill through their jobs, and I'll come to that. We need to think about workforce sustainability. And that's one of the things, as I say, we'll talk about. So the first thing, and I really like this, which is where we're, in essence, basically saying, in the future, there will be no jobs. So why worry about it? And I remember prior to COVID, every time I went down to Westminster, they would say, have you got any research on the robots? And I always used to say, no, we haven't, because nobody's got any research on the robots. And they said, but we're going to lose all these jobs. And these apocalyptic claims, 47% of jobs would disappear. Lever said it would be 90% of jobs would disappear. McKinsey's report down to 51 and so on. So it's a big public concern. As I say, every time I went to Westminster, civil servants were saying we need some research. What I didn't know, that my predecessors in the Institute had done exactly the same research back in the early 80s when the microchips were introduced, because it was exactly the same debate that all the jobs are going to disappear. And we needed what we would now call universal basic income, where none of us would be working and the state would give us some money to live on. The problem with as I say up here, the problem with all of that is that the evidence for all this was just econometric modelling and a bit of eyeballing thrown in, what people, experts, think would happen in the future. So there was really no evidence in the UK about what was going to happen. And so we commissioned by the CIPD and using YouGov, we did a representative survey of UK employers who had introduced AI and automation to see what had happened. And for those of you who thought you were cool kids at the back and now can't read the screen, 4 things are important about this table. One is, here, has the introduction of technology led to job loss? 40% of companies said yes, it had. So there are some job losses. Then we say, where are these jobs being lost? Mainly lower skilled jobs. And then we ask the reverse question, has it created employment? Just over 40% said, yes, it's created employment. So there's a real split between companies who have lost jobs and those who have created jobs. And then we ask the obvious question again, where are these jobs? What type of jobs are they? High-skilled jobs that are being created. And when we asked about a range of other issues to do with those jobs, the ones that were still left. This is very interesting. So remember that we were all supposed to lose our jobs. What they said is the jobs in the future created by AI and advanced automation, there'll be more complicated jobs. They'll require more skills. The workers who do them will have more control over their work. And if you look at this as well, actually higher pay. And down at the bottom, 40% of organizations said jobs would be more secure because of this. So takeaway there is not all of jobs are going to disappear. Some will, but some will be created. And the ones that are residual will be changing, and probably for the better. The other thing we've been told about is there is a green revolution happening. And you remember our not the current prime minister, not the last prime minister, but the prime minister before stood up and said, I'm going to create 250,000 new green jobs. There's going to be a green revolution in the UK. And then he quietly slipped out about 3 months later. It wasn't going to be 250,000 new jobs. It was going to be 500,000 new jobs. But nobody said, what's a green job? And there's a big thing in Scotland around this. They've got a climate emergency plan up there. And so they said to us, well, we've got all this big debate. Could you look for us? Could you check for us where the green jobs are? And we said, yes, we can do it, but we need to first say what a green job is, because there's a lack of definition about it. So we adapted one. So this is 3 types of jobs which are affected by net zero transition. And we've adapted this for the UK from an American model for the US Bureau of Labour. There's a big paper on this. First of all, there's new and green emerging jobs. The kind of classic pure green jobs, typically in clean energy and renewables. Then there are those jobs which are already existing but will change because of the transition. So, for example, a good example is lawyers. Environmental law is now a really big area. Their skill sets are not necessarily changing. They were going into court, they were doing all the research and advocacy and everything else, but their knowledge base is changing. And then finally, there are old jobs which are not changing in terms of their composition of their skills or their tasks or the knowledge, but they'll be more in demand. Truck drivers hauling around hydrogen, for example, in diesel trucks. So, DFE gives us some money, and we web scrape all the UK vacancies, and it's a clean data set. I mean, we've been very clear about this. We've approached when we do Working Futures by various companies who say we can provide data for you on job vacancies. And we said, okay, show us. And they said, we've got 80 million job vacancies in the UK. And I said, but there's only 66 million people in the population. Only 30 million of them are working. I think there's an awful lot of duplicates in there. So DFE give us funding to be able to develop a clean data set of job vacancies. And if any of you are interested in it, to stop it from just sitting on our computers, we can help you access some of that. Anyway, so we looked at these 3 skills. And this is what we found. I'm just reporting this for Scotland, but we found the same findings in Liverpool City region, Sheffield City region, and in the Midlands. Basically, at the far side are those new and emerging green jobs. only 4% of jobs currently are new and green jobs. Enhanced skilled jobs, enhanced skills and knowledge jobs, quarter, 25%. Increased demand, 10%. 60% are just old jobs that are completely unaffected. We then looked at the demand for these jobs, and you can see that roughly it's the same. So if you think about 4% plus 25% plus 10% is roughly 40%. 40% of all job vacancies as well are green jobs across these three categories, which means it's a pretty steady state. But of all the green jobs, and this is for Scotland, over a period from 2019 to 2022 when we were asked to look at this, it's a rise from 15 to 22%. And of course it went down during COVID, but then picked up again. But again, interestingly, most increase in demand is in that middle group. So what you've got is not a huge number of pure green jobs in the renewables, but lots of old jobs that are greening. I mean, it's very interesting, particularly for you guys. So, are there skill shortages? Often talked about this when we're asked, can we look at where the skill shortages are? And we've been commissioned various times by DFE to look at this, and currently we're doing a project for the ILO on how we can affect skills policy. And you can see here, shortages, broadly defined, are reported by about 13% of employers in the UK. But that conflates skill shortages with labour shortages. So in some cases, there may be the skills out there, but people are not going into the jobs because they don't think it's paid well enough, or there are insufficient flexibility in working hours. So there may be enough skills, but they're not going into it. And it's very difficult to disaggregate the two of them. But generally, for a skills match to occur, as the stock of skills in the labour market rises, so the demand for those skills should rise. So basically, if we pump more money into higher education and create more graduates, we'd assume, for it to make sense, that there would be more graduate jobs in the labour market. That would be a skills matching. The tricky thing is, when we try and count skills, as I said before, we don't have a measure of it. When we try and count it, we just use qualifications. And actually for employers, qualifications are not always the best signal. So if you're going to hire a history graduate, for example, what skills have they got? And I sometimes wonder if it's about skills, where the university lecturers are the best people to be teaching about skills, particularly when it comes to things like presentational skills. Anyway, so what do we see when we look at the data? We actually see that supply is now outstripping demand and is probably structurally built in to the labour market. We're actually producing too many graduates. So there's an overqualified workforce. And as I say, it seems to be structurally built in. But we need to have a distinction between people who might be overqualified for their jobs, but actually do use their skills. So going back to graduates, if you, for example, were a history graduate and you go into a state agency, you might not use your knowledge of history, but you might use your analytical skills and your presentational skills. So when you ask graduates, as we have done in the state agency business, whether they feel they are under or overqualified or under or overskilled for the jobs, they go, no, I'm using my presentational skills and analytical skills, and they're quite happy in their jobs. But that raises something which is really vexing our minds, is 16% is still higher than all shortages, which includes labour shortage and skill shortages. But it raises another important question. Why aren't employers better using the skills that they already have? If, as a minimum, 16% of employees and employers, basically, because we've got some matching surveys, are saying that there's an underusage of skills, why is that happening? We're talking about productivity and we're talking about boosting more skills. Employers, if they want more productivity, should use the skills they've got. That raises conceptually for us, and this is the thing we're battling with the ILO at the moment. It's a skills circle, but I couldn't get the circle to work, so my daughter's right. So the top bit there, development, supply, demand, is a kind of, we call it the skills circle. By development, we mean training and education. By supply, we mean the pipeline from higher education to work. By demand, most people talk about demand very bluntly. There are two types of demand. Type 1 to get a job, and type 2 to do the job. So you might be required, if an employer is faced with a graduate and somebody with A levels, for example, and they're paying the same wage, they're going to go, oh, I'll take the graduate because they're better qualified. But they might not need a graduate in that job. So the skills or qualifications you need to get the job might be different, as we've already seen, from those to do the job. And we call that type 2 demand deployments, the use of skills in the workplace. And as careers, people are interested in careers, this is where you are. You're, if you like, the marshals and the guardians of that pipeline. But in order to do that, you need to think about engaging skill supply, the development of skills and where they're happening and what employers want in order to be able to get people into work. So that's where we kind of are with the ILO, trying to get them to rethink demand and how employers might be able to better utilize their skills. The fourth thing, and this is just me being very facetious, an apple a day will overcome sickness absence. And that's because in my place, every time we talk about sickness absence in the workplace and employee well-being, we talk about send your staff on mindfulness training courses, as if that will solve it. Here's the thing. There's a national crisis, and these aren't my words. This is the occupational the occupational medicine people. There's a national crisis. Too much ill health from jobs. Employers lose 50 working days per employee per year through ill health. Ill health from jobs, not ill health related to other things. Days lost, as you can see up there, a lot of days lost. The cost, 18 billion. Lost output, 32 to 41 billion. And since COVID, 2.5 million workers have become economically inactive due to long-term sickness. If you're to be honest, and you look in the Office for National Statistics data, we don't quite know all the reasons for that, but some of that, not all of it, some of that will be due to work. And I also flagged something else. That's likely to be an underestimation, because when the Health and Safety Executive count days lost due to work, they look at very immediate things, not long-term illnesses, and only some diseases or risks are calculated. So it's likely to be an underestimation, and we're trying to grapple with that with the Office of National Statistics, hopefully in the future. We know it's a problem. There have been 4 government reviews in the last 20 years about this, starting in 2008 with Carol Black, then we've had the Taylor Review, the Marmot Review, and then the Farmer-Stevenson Review. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. I think the problem is we're focusing on the apples and the mindfulness training as remedial actions to fix people. And Marmot makes this point. He says, people become ill from work. We let them go off work with sickness absence, and then we bring them back to the same jobs that make them ill. Why do we do it? It's madness. So what we need to think about is preventative actions. And this is, I'm just almost going to finish on this, which is, this is my fantasy. Does anybody know what this is? Does anybody know what the Plimsoll line is? Somebody's nodding at the back. What's the Plimsoll line?
Where the water meets the boat.
Where the water meets the boat. Okay, I'm never getting on your boat as you feel the captain. Kind of right. I went to a naval school, and I've got an O-level in seamanship and an O-level in navigation. And at the time, I'm quite old, I said to them, we had to do it on little pieces of rulers. And I said, why don't we use computers? And the guy who taught us navigation said, computers will never catch on. There'll be no computers at sea to help you with your navigation, he said. Anyway, so this is the Plimsoll line. 19th century, 18th century, early 19th century, lots of ships were being lost because they're being overloaded. So this guy, Plimsoll, Samuel Plimsoll, said, why don't we find out what the safe working load is for loading ships? And it's called the Plimsoll line. You see it on all ships. And basically, if you can see the line, you're safe. If the line is submerged below the water, it means you're overloaded and you're likely to sink and people lose their lives. And the insurance companies love this because they thought, oh, this is useful. And you can see now there's all different variations, but use basic science. I would like us to do that for jobs. Find out where the safe line is for health. If you can see the line, it's a healthy job. If you can't see the line, it's an unhealthy job. And we're just at the moment, we've been working with DWP and Department for Health to see if you can do something around this, because we just say it would be an absolute game changer if you could do this. What you want to do is redesign jobs so that they maintain or improve people's health. So we know, for example, just an example, if you use your skills in the work, going back to my point before, you're likely to be happier in work because you feel useful. And across surveys, when you ask people what constitutes a good job, as an aggregate level, it's not pay. Pay comes in at number 7. Number 1 is being able to use my skills and capabilities at work. So, takeaways for career skills thinking. Robots, clearly, they're not coming to take jobs. It's likely that there's going to be a shuffling upwards to more higher skilled jobs, fewer low skilled jobs, but the jobs that will be around will be better jobs as well, at least marked by pay and security. The green revolution, it's mainly at the moment old jobs that are greening. And one thing we can do, I think it's very important, for these kinds of jobs, whether it's welders who are welding cars one week and they're now welding wind turbines the next, it's not a new degree they need, it's not a new apprenticeship they need. What they need are tweaks to their existing skills and knowledge sets, micro-credentials. That would be very useful. There is an issue, however, with both new green jobs and greening jobs, that they tend to be dominated by prime age males. That's because they're dominated by the engineering professions in the new green jobs, and in the greening jobs by the skilled trades. So younger workers, older workers, and female workers tend to be excluded, which means if we're going to talk about a just transition, we've got a lot of work to do. Skills, underuse rather than the supply of skills is the problem. So we need to think about how we can better use skills in the workplace, both for productivity reasons and for better health reasons. And then linking with healthy jobs, we need to redesign jobs that support good health, enable people to work longer because we've got a population working longer, and improve the retention of those who are in. Just 2 things I'll just leave with this as kind of not anecdotes, but one of them is an anecdote. In the NHS, it's women around about 50 who drop out. Why? Because there's no flexibility in that. They feel that they're badly managed. If we can redesign jobs, we'll keep them in there. And secondly, one of the things I want to do in the Healthy Jobs Initiative is to look at the relationship between menopause and the design of jobs. It turns out that you can keep more older female workers in the workplace if they can open a window to regulate temperature. I was speaking with some design architects. I want to go into design schools and figure out what they're being taught. And they went and said to me, why would you want to open a window? We've got a smart building where we can regulate the temperature. And I said, obviously you're not doing that. If we can get people to have windows to open, that would be great. So we want to go in and look at, in design schools, how buildings are being designed, not just the way that people are managed as well. So hopefully lots of things for you to think about over the next couple of days. And if you want to get in touch about the job vacancy data, please do so. Thanks very much.
Before Chris sits down, I'm just wondering, does anyone have any questions of clarification around his presentation? Anything anyone wants to ask? Keith? Sorry.
I was too keen, I was rushing off, sorry.
In your presentation, you were talking about supply side, you phrase sort of graduate or higher education as a feeder into the labour market. What does the data say about vocational and technical training, both for young people and for adults, and how that's connected to the world of work?
It's an interesting one. So we've got a data set. Sorry.
Could you repeat the question?
So I talked about higher education. What about vet and how that feeds into the world of work? Is that right? So we have a data set called Future Track. And again, if any of you want to come and ask us about it, we've tracked graduates since 1995. Got big data, and we asked them lots of things about what they're doing. And the latest one asked them whether or not they can afford a house. So there's lots of things. We've tried to do the same for vet, and we failed absolutely abysmally, because it turns out people who are doing vet apprenticeships don't have a single identifier. And when we started doing it, even the colleges couldn't communicate with their own students through emails, which I just find struggling to get my head around. What we do know about vet is if you look at where the skill shortages, not the labour shortages are, it tends to be in in skilled trades. And that will only pick up in the green transition, as we've seen, the greener jobs. So there's a very good link between vet, potentially between vet and the world of work, but we're not exploiting it properly. And my personal opinion is that degree apprenticeships were not the way forward to do that. The other thing that I would say about vet and the skilled trades is, again, there's this gender problem. There's also a race problem with skilled apprenticeships. So we're not, that pipeline vet, we're not getting people into vet in the way that there's too few people doing vet, and we're not maximising widening enough participation to get into that either. But if you ask employers, most employers, where the skill shortage are, it's in the vet related occupations.
Thank you. Yeah.
You identified that figure of 13% for 13%. I don't know how to use it.
Do you want my daughter to come and help you?
13% as the area of skill shortages.
No.
I'm just wondering, in the green energy sector, that 13% could lead to business disruption.
So my question is, did you do any analysis on the criticality of the 13% shortages in terms of business performance? And could that be actually quite a high figure, given that most companies work with the bare minimum of staff?
The short answer to that is no, but what we can infer is there's no demand, no expanding demand in those occupations. And what is interesting, two things are happening where, one is if you want to increase demand in there, it's things like business support, it's about regulation, all those kind of things which will enhance support. But the second thing is, which we're slightly worried about, is what my colleague Jason, who does all the data scraping for us, is what he's called greenwashing of job titles. So Nicola Sturgeon made a speech in Scotland about the importance of the green industries, and we tracked job vacancies, and the number of job vacancies which suddenly mentioned green or sustainable after her speech just went up. And so there are things like sustainable finance manager emerging, and we have a good chuckle when Jason pulls all these things down. But the question is, has that job, the knowledge base might have changed a bit, but is it just the flipping of existing occupations through the title? So we need to be able to drill down into those occupations. And unfortunately, with the SOC at the moment, I said every job's got a number and a description, but it's quite high level. So it will do things like FE lecturer, but it doesn't say what the FE lecturers are teaching. And we've just developed a new SOC, which goes down to, it's called level 6, which really goes down to the small level, so we can try and track whether there are changes within occupations. So those organisations which are advertising those jobs will be able to tell whether or not actually the content of the job has changed to be more sustainable. But at the moment, as I say, as a second development, we're slightly worried about the greenwashing of titles.
I think we'll move on. Thanks, Chris. That's fascinating. I'd like to invite Clare Hatton to join me now. So we're obviously in the city of Birmingham, wonderful city in the centre of England, and part of the West Midlands Combined Authority, where Clare has been working, as she will tell us. So we thought it'd be really interesting to have a focus on what's happening in this particular part of England to really bring to life the issues that we're talking about. So thanks, Clare.
Pleasure, and nice to be here. Until recently, I left West Midlands Combined Authority 8 weeks ago. I work for a consultancy called MH&A now, but I spent 6 years at the Combined Authority, and my last role was the Executive Director for Employment Skills, Health and Communities. So I guess what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is, what does that mean when you're in a regional agency? What does careers and sustainability mean from a slightly different perspective? So you're not going to get academic research like you've had from Chris, but you're going to get quite a practical view about what does this actually mean and what do we do with it, and what is careers and sustainability when it hits the ground. I suppose the first thing I wanted to do was to say, for us in the West Midlands, what was our problem statement? Why do we think about careers? Where do we jump to? Where does it come from? And we have a youth unemployment issue still in this region. It is slightly higher than the national average, but there are some wards, there are some areas, and there are some groups where youth unemployment is consistently high. And that sits at odds with some of the vacancies in this region. Chris has talked about this, they're not always good jobs, they're not always real when you look at all of the numbers, but actually there are some places, there are some groups for whom access isn't equal. And we have some particular issues with youth unemployment and NEET. And that was something, as a combined authority, you don't have exactly the accountability for it, but you have a responsibility for your place. So we used to think quite a lot about what do we need to do to reduce youth unemployment and to reduce NEET. Reduce it where it is, but also what do we need to do to prevent it? And then you'll see why I'll come back to careers in a minute. Chris has touched a bit on economic inactivity when he's talked about health. In this region, not inconsistent nationally, around about 20% of the workforce are economically inactive, so not working and not unemployed, so not looking for work. A lot of that is health related. It's all the groups that you would expect, some of the ones Chris has talked about, but in this region as well, growing economic inactivity in younger males under the age of 35. What's that about? Some interesting trends when you get right under the data. And again, real issue for us in the region. We can't be a buoyant region. We can't drive economic growth if we don't have people working and participating in the labour market. So how do you get wider labour market participation? And it's really complex, right? There's lots of factors that do with that. The type of jobs, how those jobs are structured. One of the other big things we spend a lot of time looking at is the Youth Employment UK survey, which is the biggest survey of young people aged 11 to 30. And really interesting what it tells us, that young people's biggest concern is the economy, and the second biggest concern is discrimination, and the third biggest concern is violence and crime. Really interesting. And we can look at that survey by different groups. It's even more poignant when you look at it by racialised groups, for example. Not much difference on gender, but lots of differences in that. So we're saying, what is going on for our young people in this region? If we're thinking about the future and we're thinking about careers, we're thinking about sustainability. We have lots of surveys, always had lots of surveys, and more recently the LSITs, you get a lot of employer feedback, you get loads of brilliant research and insight, like some of the stuff Chris has talked about telling you where the labour market's going to move, what's happening with jobs, and you're sat there, you've got all of that, you've got all this stuff about what's going on with the economy, and yet you're sitting here knowing you've got these groups of residents. We've still got massive vacancies in the workforce, in the region. But I think the biggest thing that we were always trying to tackle was, how do we address inequality? How do we use careers, education, careers transitions? How do we make that more sustainable? And how do we do that to really tackle inequality in our region, in our workforces, in our communities? So I think those were some of the biggest, and I thought I'd just start there because I think that's really important in terms of the context of what we did and how we viewed what we do with careers in the region. So what would I say about when we think about careers and the careers service and the careers advice and guidance in the region? My gosh, there's a lot of bodies involved. There's a lot of organisations involved. I don't think a week went by where somebody didn't contact me and say, oh, we'd like to run a careers programme for these kids in this region or this group or that group, or we'd like to do it for this sector or that sector. So there is no shortage of people wanting to support. I would say, though, probably 90% of them want to do it with kids. Very few people want to talk seriously or start their thinking seriously about adults. All the careers initiatives, all the things people came to talk to us about were always focused on kids. And that is really important that we get it right for kids. But there's very little thinking about how we engage adults. And when we think about some of the challenges Chris has already presented to us, there's something about people in early adulthood as well, but all through their adulthood about careers. Working life is long, or should be long, and healthy working life should be long. So how do we make sure that people know about those careers that are coming? It's not good enough just to talk to kids in school. And I think that's something that we were always grappling with, was all the initiatives seem to be around kids. There was a nationally defined service. We had a brilliant working relationship with the National Career Service, and they did wonderful work. But when we sat down with them really and said, how are we going to, going back to my previous slide, how are we going to work with, let's pick where we're sat now, Ladywood down the road for anyone who knows it, on any metric you look at, comes out the worst. On unemployment, on health, on all sorts of things, on deprivation. And if we say, how can we work there? They'd say, yeah, the contract doesn't allow us to do that kind of thing because the contract is structured to meet target groups and things, and we can't flex. Because we'd say, why can't we just saturate Ladywood with all of our services? Why can't we go and do something really intentional and really deep? And it would be, oh, well, our national contract won't let us. And it wasn't a lack of wanting to do it. It really was that. So a lot of the time our conversations would be with challenging with government about, but yeah, it's great to have a national career service. Absolutely, there should be something for everybody. But if it doesn't work at place, what's the point? You're touching the same people all the time that are already in the job centre very often. And funding. Funding's always an issue, isn't it? So I'll just get that out there right now. For our careers and enterprise company work across the region, which is managing the career hubs and all of the work around the Gatsby benchmarks. So this is for the whole of the West Midlands. Less than £2 million a year. You even try and divide that by just kids in year 10 and 11. £5 a kid at most. It's not a lot, is it? We don't fund it well enough. You're not going to make a difference if we don't fund it properly. So I guess that's just what I want to say about the context and the challenge of really providing, brilliant careers education. And I will do a bit more positive stuff, I promise. So what do we think when we talk about sustainability? I think we think about public services, and I think about how do we create in our region services and ecosystems that can last, that aren't just changed every 5 minutes by new governments and new policies, but that have the ability to flex and evolve as research and intel comes in so that we can do it, but services that are designed to underpin opportunity and economic growth. And I think that's not often enough the starting point when we're thinking about how we configure and how we deliver our career services to those who need it most in our region. And because I'm not sure that's where the design comes from. I'm not sure that there's an outcomes framework attached to any of the nationally funded careers programmes we get. It's always quite short term when the outcome should really be better lives, better money, greater sustainability in communities for the rest of people's working lives, really. So I guess that's our thoughts on sustainability. Why was careers advice and guidance the answer for us? Touched on devolved nations a little bit earlier. I think the ambition for us in the West Midlands always has been and continues to be an all-age career service. And why do I say that? Because I think that artificial barrier sometimes about age just isn't there. It should be for everybody, and that's not to say it shouldn't be person-centred and it shouldn't be person-led and it shouldn't respond to what they need. But you need an all-age career service. You don't just stop needing it because you're 19, because you should have finished your full-time education system at 19. Life isn't like that, and life isn't like that for a lot of the young people in this region. They have interrupted, journeys. They might come back in their early 20s, and then all of a sudden you're not in the right group for something. We really believe that was wrong. We believe there should be an entitlement for everybody in the region for an all-age career service. I'll come on in a minute to how we think that's possible. But the other thing is evidence-led. We don't feel that it's evidence-led enough about how we design services and the practice that we have in the region. And I suppose the first thing I touch on is data, the use of data, particularly with young people. We don't have anything like they have in Scotland with the post-16 data hub, where they know all the kids that leave from school, they know the careers advice and interventions they've had, they know where they go, they know when they drop out. In this country, we ping spreadsheets back and forwards between colleges and local authorities and report neat figures 12 months later. It's scandalous in this day and age that we can't join up that data to make sure we can provide a really targeted, efficient and real-time service. And that's something we felt really strongly about, is there's got to be a move forward in how we use that data so that the practice that we have out there as well then can be targeted to the right people. I think that equates through life. So I think big changes. I think for us, in our thinking about what we would really want, so we would want an all-age career service underpinned by proper data sharing and evidence-led practice. And that's what we're aiming for. So what does that mean? I think it means we have to rethink delivery of our career services and how we do that. We've talked a bit, haven't we, about AI and what it's going to do to jobs. And Chris has given you really good articulation about how real that is. We don't very often talk about what the role of AI is in reaching people and delivering career services, because there's got to be massive potential as well for the way we do that, to be able to broaden the reach for those who can self-serve to some degree. And I think there's much more that we could probably be doing around how we use AI to widen those services to make sure we have got an all-age career service that is delivered. And I think that comes to the data as well. I mean, how much data is out there on jobs, on future jobs, on trends, on vacancies, on the skills needed for those jobs, on the qualifications? There is tons of it, yet it sits on quite flat platforms. You know, Chris talked about LMI4. It's a brilliant resource, but it's no good if it's just sat on a website over there. If it's not real time, if it's not accessible, if it's not gamified, if it's not hitting somebody's phone in some kind of app, if it's not pinging because you've set up for alerts and you've walked past the Apple shop and they go, there's vacancies in here, and do you know what, these are growing jobs and you could be earning this much money. And if you wanted to do it, you know, this is the type of course you could do. We should easily be able to do that with AI. We should be stimulating people's thinking about careers and opportunities, because lots of what we heard from the people we would work with is, you can't be what you can't see. And for lots of the young people and adults in this community, in this region that we're talking about, there are careers that they think are not for them. There are careers that they don't even know about. There's careers that we probably don't know about, but I certainly won't as well. And unless we start to bring all of that together and we use all of those technology-enabled ways to be able to do that, and I'm not suggesting it could replace the workforce, but it could absolutely be part of a future service. And I think we have to think seriously about how we do some of that differently. I think we know money's tight. We know there's not going to be lots of money. And I think our thought in delivery was we really need much more targeting of intervention to inequality. So we really need to be intentional and purposeful about where we target our services, and we need to be sustainable. Doing endless projects 1 year with 10 black girls in STEM doesn't solve the issue. It really doesn't. You know, it beggars beyond belief the amount of times we got offered 20 grand to try and do a little project on this, and you go, it's great, and if it helps a few kids, but when are we actually going to talk about doing this seriously and sustainably? And that's really, really important when you're thinking about driving economic change, driving inclusive growth in a region. Talked a bit about person-centred already. I think there's lots more we can think about how we make services really, really person-centred rather than driven. You know, Gatsby benchmarks have done a great deal in terms of, you know, bringing things to fore, making people talk about it, looking at it. But it's a set of benchmarks at the end of the day. And I'm still not sure it really addresses some of the inequalities that are in there. I think there's probably more we can do. That should be a baseline, the Gatsby benchmarks. Everybody should be getting that. That should be the universal service. But there are some groups and some individuals who need more targeted. I think lots of the career service need more recognition of local labour markets. We talked about green jobs, and we've heard lots about green jobs and the changes. But the green jobs here in the West Midlands, very different to they'll be in the northwest or northeast, where you've got coastal things. So it's got to be in context, or it's not real for people. I think in terms of delivery, we do need a national framework. There should be something national, but I think it's about local delivery. It's about integration with other services, health, with education, and I think it is about how we do that locally and intentionally and work well to do that. So a few final thoughts in terms of where I think we were in the West Midlands in terms of challenges and implications to think about. I think there's something around workforce, around how we, you know, have we got all the workforce we need in careers education? Have we got the diversity of workforce we need in careers education? How do we enable the workforce to really do that targeted work, and how do we take some of it delivered through different ways, use of AI, etc. I think funding is an issue. I think funding's always been an issue for us in this region about providing careers advice. I'm sure that's it nationally. I think user integration, how we get user-led services and how we design that is an implication for how we design future services. And I do think, coming to the last 2 points, I think it's about systems design, about public service reform. And what do I mean by that? I think it's about outcomes. I think it's about outcomes for people, for communities in place. And I think it's about how public services collectively come together and work together to do that rather than in silos. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I know that's probably a little bit different to maybe other stuff you've heard, but I just thought it would be interesting to share that perspective of what it means when you're sat there and you're kind of charged with being a commissioner in this space. So, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And once again, if we can use the roving mic just to see if there's any sort of questions of clarification for Claire before we go into a bit more of a wider discussion. Siobhan.
Thank you, Claire. I thought that was really inspiring, actually, and I think you addressed a lot of elephants in the room for many of us who are working in this sector. I just wondered whether you might be able to say a little bit about what you think the opportunities from devolution offer us in terms of that national, local delivery, because we do know there are massive tensions around that, and I'd just be keen to hear your thoughts on it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, having worked in a combined authority for the last 6 years, you won't be surprised if I say I'm a real advocate of devolution. I am, but I have worked in national policy roles as well, and I can see both. And that's why I think on the slide I talked about national framework, local delivery, and I think that's the strength. I think the power of devolution is being able to tailor those services and things to your local people, your local labour markets. I think regions can bring an energy and a convening power to the labour market and the players in it. You can pull employers in the room. Mayors have a lot of power around that. If I look at a lot of the stuff Andy Burnham has done as well around the MBAC, you can create that sense of purpose. You can pull employers, educators, professionals, young people, residents together in a way that doesn't happen nationally. But the danger is, unless you have that national framework, you do get a bit of a postcode lottery and you can end up with quite different services. So I kind of believe on lots of these things, there has to be a national framework or a national baseline and a standard, and then it gets flexed and amplified and targeted in different ways to meet regional need. But I do believe there's a real power in, it's not just about funding coming through regional governance, it is about the role of convening and the role of influencing. And I think that's something that mayors particularly and combined authorities can do in a really different space in terms of bringing public and private sector together as well.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, a question from with the ponytail. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. From an Australian perspective, so much of what you said actually resonated. Is there an example that you can think of that was successfully scaled and actually, delivered beneficial outcomes? And what were the characteristics of that initiative?
I've definitely got some skills examples. I'm not sure I've got so many careers examples. I think I'll give you a couple. I'll try and give you a skills one. I'll try and give you a careers one. Some of you may have heard of skills boot camps that the government introduced. We piloted them here in the West Midlands initially back in 2018. And when we piloted them on a small grant basis. We decided to work with different organisations, and we looked at what it was. Digital was one of the things at the time. We started off with 10 providers. And from that, actually, that programme is now national. But in terms of outcomes, in the West Midlands, the boot camps now, £27 million a year into boot camps, 72% of people moving into jobs, and they are good jobs because we set our outcome at jobs that were over 28,000, which at the time was the mean salary for the region. It's gone up slightly, it's about 32 now for the region. But when I look at some of the providers that have come through that, Neo ran a programme called Black Code Her, and they went from being quite small organisation to now supplying Goldman Sachs for Goldman Sachs Talent and Diversity, and they've got a really sustainable business. So I think that's a really good example. I think in careers, did quite a bit in the Black Country with SEN young people, and created a really brilliant model in terms of local employers working with SEN young people to give a different kind of work experience, so probably a more ambitious one than sometimes they would have got, and challenging. And we managed to scale that across most of the Black Country. Funding limited us taking it further, but I think we've got a really good model there. Still not the systems-wide design, I don't think, but some bits that I think could go further and be joined up.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From the big picture perspective to hearing about some of the challenges of making change on the ground within this region. And I think it'd be great to now invite questions for either Chris or Clare, or indeed some questions that could be addressed by both of them, and get into a little bit of discussion. We'll use the roving mic if we can. If you indicate that you want to speak, we'll get the mic to you. Tristram, thank you.
Yeah, hi. This sort of responds to Chris's presentation, but I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on this, because it seemed to me, Chris, what you were doing was sort of puncturing a lot of labour market myths, that we have this sort of discourse of there's the changing world of work and it's all going to be robots and things are moving faster than ever before and you're not going to be able to do anything other than just run as fast as you can. And you've kind of punctured a lot of the problems with that and why that's not actually an accurate description of what's happening in the labour market. I just wonder whether both of you sort of recognise that changing world of work discourse and why you feel it's so popular, because you hear it kind of brought out, and I hear lots of careers advisors reproduce it, and I hear lots of policymakers reproduce it, and I just, and if it's not true, which I buy that it isn't, then why does everybody keep talking about it?
Can you hear Chris?
Can you hear me if I don't go into here? I mean, it's not that the world of work isn't changing. It is changing. It's just changing incrementally. There's no big bang, whether it's with green jobs or digital jobs and all these things. But why it happens, I've got two very cynical explanations. One is, if you say something dramatic, it's going to change. It grabs policymakers' attention, especially if you say we're going to fall off the edge of a cliff unless you do something. And the second, and this really underlines the thing that Clare was saying there, is it's the lack of an evidence base. A lot of the people who are feeding these things don't do robust evidence. And I know academics can be boring, and my daughter thinks I'm the most boring man in the world because I talk about data. And we need that evidence base with the careers that Clare was talking about. So there are two reasons. I think the wrong people have got the ears of government, and I think what they're suggesting isn't evidence-based. I think, and that's why, and they peddle something. You can see this with previous Prime Minister, the Green Revolution. It's coming. It's going to be a big bang. It's not. It's incremental. Same with the robots.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that as well. A lot of it is about, wanting a big announcement and things. If I think about all the work we did on adult skills and retraining adults to get back into work, adults very often, you'll all know this, don't train for jobs that are coming in 5 or 6 years' time. They train for the jobs they can see advertised now that they'll earn the salary they want to earn. And if I think about the range of skills programs that we commissioned, and we had, I had £170 million that we were in charge of across the West Midlands. We spent a fraction of that on green. The stuff we did on green would have been a bit of retrofit, but it was people already working in the industry, like Chris said. It was heat pump installation for people who were already electricians. We weren't being consumed with demand for brand new green jobs. It was incremental upskilling for people who'd already got jobs, mechanics wanting to work on electric vehicles, for example. So it was much more iterative than that. But Chris is right, that's not exciting, is it? That's not the launch of a green jobs plan.
Thank you. And I'm very struck by what you both said about data and the way that data is being compiled and at local level and then being used. Seems to be a big issue.
Can I just say another point, again, which underlines Claire's point about, it's not about evidence, it's about the careers information linking up with things like health and inequalities. Two things. One is, it amazes me that in the UK we can't link health and employment data. When we do it, we use Belgian data because the Belgians link employment and health data. So in Belgium we can say, if you started off in a temporary job, what's your chances of developing mental health problems later in life? We can do it. We can't do it in the UK. And the second thing is we have lots of policies around inclusive growth, inequalities, but we don't measure them in an effective way. And one of the things the last couple of months we've been trying to do is to say, what are the policy imperatives when it comes to local labour markets and people getting into jobs? These are the things that government are interested in. Why don't we create a kind of dashboard of indicators where it's things like closing the gender pay gap, closing the disability employment gap? Why don't we create that? And suddenly people go, oh, that's a good idea. And you think, it's not a good idea. Well, it is, it's a genius idea because it's come from me. That's what I always tell my partner anyway. Anything she has is a decent idea. What I have are genius ideas. And as she says, it's not for you to determine, dear, whether it's a genius idea. But it just seems to me a no-brainer that we should create, 10 indicators of that, and do it on a national level and do it on a local level, and we can then chart progress towards reducing inequalities and improving health. Claire's absolutely right. We need to have joined up policy actions, I think.
Thank you. Anne has a question.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes, I think so. Following on from that, I'm just wondering, colleagues, what your thoughts are on the efficacy of current apprenticeship programs. For example, why don't more employers offer apprenticeships? Why is the dropout so high? Why are there more adults doing apprenticeships now than young people? And how is that addressing the skills gap that we've been talking about?
I could get on my soapbox for hours about that one. I won't. Right. What's the issues with apprenticeships at the moment? Well, the issue in terms of the impact is the significant drop in young people, particularly doing apprenticeships. So whilst we've seen apprenticeship numbers drop slightly nationally, what we've seen is a massive increase in higher level apprenticeships, level 4, 5 and 6, and a massive increase in those people who are already employed doing it. Where we've seen the drop is those under the age of 24 and those coming into apprenticeships as their first job. So that's what the data does tell us. Why do I think that's happened? I mean, I think there's some brilliant outcomes from the levy policy in terms of parity of esteem. It's put the apprenticeship agenda in a different space. People talk about it. They're now getting UCAS points. They're now getting all sorts. So it's done lots of good in that. But in creating an employer-led system where employers are paying for that, what employers have done is, because they don't want to lose their levy, use it on their existing workforce. And from a provider perspective, and it's still quite a provider-driven market, even though it's a levy, it's so much easier to get a levy-paying employer with 10 people doing a management apprenticeship than it is to go and find 10 retail young people. Really risky. They drop out, they move, they change jobs. It does your success, it doesn't do your success rates any good. So again, it's this thing about a basket of measures. We have such a blunt measure of the success of apprenticeships, which is, do they get right through their endpoint assessment, and is it timely? We don't measure anything around social inclusion, who they are, any of the other drivers that our apprenticeships are there for. And again, it's this blunt basket of measures and funding that drives a behaviour that's given us some brilliant things, but it's given us some real perverse consequences as well, in my view.
The question we had before, which was about vet, and I said we tried to create a cohort of apprentices. And one of the things I wanted to ask them was, and we couldn't do this because we just couldn't get big enough survey, was, what's a good job for an apprentice? We never asked them that. And when you do ask them, and we started doing some interviews around this, but not enough to be representative or to make a big case for this. If you asked males what was a good job if you've completed an apprenticeship, it was around money. But often for women, it was a job which is local, which matches their skills. They're much less likely to move. So I think, but that thing about moving is actually something which is much more indicative of working class kids as well. You know, when we've asked working class kids in the institute in Newcastle where a good job is, and they live in North Newcastle above the Tyne, they go, ooh, it's not bad jobs in South Newcastle. I've got to cross the river. And you can understand that because they live at home when they're doing the apprenticeships. They can't afford to live anywhere else. Whereas graduates tend to move around a lot more. So the worldview is slightly different. So we need to start asking what a good job is for apprentices in order to be able to address it. And again, Claire's point is absolutely right. It's no use. I think the value of the apprenticeship levy, as Claire says, is it raised the profile again of apprenticeships, and that's vitally important. But we have to remember that apprenticeships are driven by demand, whether or not employers need them. So unless the demand's there, going back to my little diagram, unless we stimulate that demand, we won't really get a lot of apprenticeships. And when we've done research in places in the Midlands, what you find is a lot of the kids do apprenticeships in local college, but there aren't jobs for them. And so they may do a fantastic apprenticeship in creative industries and they end up working in McDonald's in rugby because there isn't a creative industry in rugby.
Thanks. I think we've probably got time for one more, if we have one. We have somebody here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wondered if you had a view on why the so-called digital revolution has had more traction in the workforce than the green revolution, when the data's there as to why we should be greening everything. Obviously, COVID will have played a role in that digital transition, but I wondered if you had a view on why we've all gone digital, but we haven't gone green.
Interesting question.
Chris will be way better placed than me, but my layperson's view on this would be digital takes cost out of business. I'm not so sure that green, I know it can, I'm not so sure the argument is quite as persuasive and compelling. I think, yeah, digital takes cost out or adds revenue in a much more explicit way than greening, be my layperson's view.
Do you think, in your view, sorry Claire, is it cooler as well?
Probably, although, I referenced the Youth Employment UK survey earlier. Green and environment is really high up on young people's agenda. So I think maybe digital's a bit ahead in being cooler, but I do think, I do think it is really something that young people are really interested in. But maybe we've got a slight, generation before where digital is possibly cool as well.
I'm aware of how naff it sounds using the word cool at my age.
You've got a proper answer, Chris.
Well, I don't know if it's a proper answer. Part of it depends where you are. We're doing some work for the European Commission at the moment, which is jointly on green and digital skills. I mean, they do join the two. That's why I'm struggling with Industry 5.0. But they are interested in the two things working together. We're not. And I suspect partly is part of the reason is, I think, because the way it's framed. The digital revolution is framed in terms of making things more efficient and more productive. So it appeals. The green debate is framed around costs. It's going to cost you to do this. And that's a lot less attractive, I think. A lot less attractive for companies, I think. And so in the same way that we're working at the moment around creating a business case for good jobs, it's important to sell it to employers. I think we ought to be thinking about a business case for the greening of jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the same answer, really, very similar and very helpful. Thank you. Well, I think we've probably run out of time, but I've certainly got lots of thoughts going through my head, not least what are the implications for what I do mostly in my day job, which is training career development professionals of what we've heard around interprofessional working, around working with data. and with technology. That's what's going through my head anyway. I'd like us all to, in a moment, to thank Claire and Chris for setting us off so well. I look forward to talking over coffee about what it's stimulated for you. Maybe you're thinking about comparisons between the UK and other policy contexts. Maybe like me, or maybe you're thinking about practice and what that means for your daily work. But we now, when we've closed this session, we've got coffee and refreshments served in the atrium, and then we've got workshops starting at 11:15, and we'll make sure that everyone moves in a timely way to those workshops, and then beyond into lunch before we have our first panel event after lunch in here. But thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, and let's show our appreciation to Claire and to Chris for that session. Thank you, and I'll let somebody lead the charge to refreshments.